This is Include, a Microsoft Partner Network podcast exploring our shared experiences in technology and business.
A shared passion that we have is making sure that women have the platforms on which to tell their stories.
In this podcast, we're having honest conversations on how to build more inclusive cultures. Welcome back to the Microsoft Partner Network podcast. Today, I have Colleen O'Brien and Sonia Dara in the studio. We got a double whammy, and I'm super excited to have two lady bosses sitting with me. They're both here at Microsoft. I'm just going to let you introduce yourself. Sonia, why don't you start?
Sure. So I have been here at Microsoft for about 4 years, joined right after college, so I was a mock hire. Oddly enough, Colleen, we both went to the same college, and she's kind of taken me under her wings being at Microsoft before I started. It's been fun. I've had, at this point, probably 6 different roles here at Microsoft. I've loved every one of them, some more than others. But right now I'm currently sitting on the Surface commercial marketing team. So really excited for a couple of events we have coming up, Ignite. So it's a busy few weeks.
And what's super cool is many of our listeners go to Microsoft Inspire or see it live streamed or check our channels, and you were on stage, weren't you?
That's right. Yeah, I forgot. I was fortunate enough to get an invitation to demo on stage with Satya for his keynote. So it was slightly terrifying is an understatement, but it was an awesome opportunity. Got to present alongside CVPs like Julia White. It was actually all 4 presenters were female, which was pretty cool.
And there was a lot of great conversation on social and feedback from our female partners that are there about having that many women on stage.
Yeah.
Of young or older, diverse looks and feels. So that was really fantastic. Congrats on that.
Thank you so much. It was great to be part of that. I think beginning setting the tone for the entire conference. It was great.
It really did. Awesome. Okay, Colleen. Tell us things.
I alluded to us going to college, but I realized you might want to just go ahead and explain that a little better than.
So I'm Colleen O'Brien. I also joined Microsoft as a college hire through the Microsoft Academy of College Hires program, or MOC. I worked in marketing for about 6 years and just moved over to the Azure engineering team as a business manager, and have been lucky enough this year to get to host a podcast with Sonia called the Women in Business and Technology podcast.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I'm obviously a huge fan, been a big podcast fan, and was really excited that we did something specifically for women. Why did you do that?
It's sort of been one tactic of this larger initiative that you see at Microsoft, where this company is taking this inclusive attitude we have internally, trying to hire and retain diverse talent, build inclusive teams, but we're bringing that externally as well. We're trying to serve more diverse populations, and one audience that the company is really focusing on is women. We saw that at the Create and Cultivate conference, which was hosted on campus last week. You see that with some of the partners that our consumer products are working with, like Marimekko. And our tactic, this podcast, has been an effort to get more women to attend some of the great conferences that Microsoft hosts every year. So we've done that strategically through hosting amazing women in business or technology roles and the allies who support them, and by taking a look at programs that are trying to drive more inclusivity in the workplace. So we've been lucky enough to interview, to meet amazingly talented women and dive deeper into the programs that are supporting them in building great careers.
Yeah. And they're male advocates as well, which is a huge part of it.
I love that you say that and point that out, because women aren't going to bridge the opportunity gap, talent gap, gender gap, whatever you want to call it, without the support of our male leaders and advocates. So in your podcast and things that you've been talking about, or things that you've seen in this company, how are the men in your lives doing that?
Yeah, so the next episode that we're just about to publish, Sonia interviews Scott Hanselman, who's a Microsoft employee, and he uses this great phrase, lending his privilege. So whether it's responding to a conference that wants him to speak and asking how many women are also speaking at that conference, or working on a board to make sure that women and people of color are really well represented. He has taken a step back from his position of privilege as a white man and sort of taken a look at all of the places that he can make technology a more inclusive space. I love that phrase, lending your privilege. I think it's something that we can all challenge ourselves to do on a day-to-day basis, regardless of what gender we are, what color we are, what type of thinkers we are, how abled we are. We all enjoy some type of privilege, and figuring out how we can extend that to voices that aren't necessarily heard. I think that's a personal challenge for all of us.
Yeah, and he hosts his own podcast called Hansel Minutes, one of, I think, actually 3 he's hosted. He does it every week, Thursday, for the last 7 years.
There's hundreds.
Like hundreds of episodes. And he makes sure that he's at, like, I think it's at least 30% women are being interviewed. And anyone who reaches out, he wants to bring them up to this platform that he has this privilege of using. So it was just great to learn from him and see how internal Microsoft employee was able to kind of take that to the next level externally as well.
So it's a very intentional thing. I think that's a really key point. And he's aware of this and intentional in what he's doing to help bring more women forward. And that can be the same for a young man, a Black man. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? It's being intentional with your actions. Let's talk a little bit about what this company, I mean, what we're doing and some of the things that you're seeing to be a little bit more inclusive.
One thing I thought, and to bring it back to Scott really quickly, is why we said advocate instead of ally. Ally can be someone saying, yes, I support, cool. But advocate was where they take action. And I think some of the actions that you can start implementing in the workplace, whether it is becoming more involved with the D&I, diversity and inclusion initiatives that Microsoft has, whether it's the recruiting efforts and making sure that it's more equal opportunity, I think taking the action is that's the step. Not just being like raising your hand. It's like pushing the like button on Facebook without doing anything.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
I love that. Not just an ally, an advocate.
Yep.
That's definitely a different perspective.
Yeah.
One of my favorite initiatives that I've seen at the company is the formation of this group called Blacklight, which is comprised of Black marketers at Microsoft and has received a ton of executive support, whether it's through forums that they're hosting or consulting services. So just a double check of the marketing that you're about to push out the door. Having another set of eyes on it is something that this group is offering. They do have an ally distribution list at the company and have promoted some actions that allies can take to move into advocacy. So since joining that distribution group, since getting those emails, I've started subscribing to NPR's Code Switch, which is a great podcast for changes along the lines of diversity and inclusion happening in the tech world. And I've started subscribing to Race Ahead, which is this daily email newsletter from Fortune magazine. They're essentially promoting stories of diversity and inclusion headlines not only along racial lines. It's a great news source if you want to get better educated on these topics and see some great examples of people making waves and changing trends.
And you're seeing, I think you've had some interesting stats. Like, we're seeing some movement.
Yes.
Yay.
I think for all the talk of diversity and inclusion in the technology world, you would think that the numbers would be changing pretty dramatically, and that is not so. The progress is really modest, but I think what's hopeful is that in a lot of the big Fortune 500 companies, these dedicated efforts are creating for some momentum. In August of 2017, Business Insider published some of these statistics. Facebook, Apple, eBay, and Microsoft have all seen their ratios of women increase by 1% over the past year. LinkedIn, which was recently acquired by Microsoft, has seen their ratio increase by 3%.
That's great.
Microsoft has increased its ratio of non-white employees by 3%, Facebook by 2%. Google, Apple, and eBay, again, has seen the ratio of non-white employees increase by 1%. So modest progress, I think, for the amount of talk on these subjects, but progress nonetheless. And then in the pipeline, Hadi Partovi, who's the founder of Code.org, on July 18th, he published an article on LinkedIn sort of touting that over 29,000 young girls took AP Computer Science this year. That's an increase of 135% year over year. And underrepresented minorities are taking AP Computer Science at a rate of 170% over last year.
Wow.
So those increases are really astronomical, which just demonstrates that the pipeline will hopefully get more flooded and the talent will increase astronomically moving forward.
Yeah. Something we talk about a lot in the partner organization and partners talk to us about is hiring the right kind of talent and retaining them. You're talking about that the pipeline is going to increase with more diversity, but the onus comes on the companies, the businesses, to think about how do you get those people in and then keep them in, right? What are your thoughts on that and ways to start thinking about that if you are a business? I mean, we have people listening that might be 2-person shop, right? They could be small. They could be 100,000 person or, so it's a big range.
A lot of the trends that I've seen are in reaching this diverse talent is stepping outside of typical recruiting pipelines.
Right.
So, for example, a lot of big companies have historically gone to colleges looking for people with standard computer science degrees. And a lot of progress on the diversity front has come from stepping away of those standard inputs to the recruiting pipeline and instead looking at code camps. So whether it's Code Fellows or Code Academy, looking at code boot camps as places where talent is and can be recruited as well.
That's a great idea.
And I think there's also something to say you don't have to be a coder to be in tech, right? So I studied economics at Harvard, and Colleen studied VES. What does that stand for, actually?
Visual and Environmental Studies. I was a filmmaker,
Filmmaker.
before I came.
Well, that makes sense why you are on your podcast now.
But you can take different paths to get in to tech, and I think even just what Colleen said, starting 6 years in marketing, she's like, hey, I'm making the leap over to engineering, it's possible. And it took someone from the recruiting side being like, all right, we don't need everyone who has a tech background to come into the tech world. We've had friends who've jumped from many different disciplines within just Microsoft in 3 years, and they actually probably become a better employee because they're so well-rounded. One fun stat I've been getting to play around with is how tech actually influences the type of people who will come into a company. So if they have the latest and greatest in terms of what they can offer, devices, or even just like kind of what some of the things we've been talking about around.
Free lunches.
Well, beyond that, but where companies feel or employees feel like they're valued by the company, just little things like that. We've seen specifically with Surface. The only reason I bring it up is Surface employees say they feel valued if the company is actually using Surface in their day-to-day roles and like the latest and greatest tech. So investments in the right places help you attract the proper talent as well and keep them happy and satisfied, if you will. But just to go back to the different backgrounds, I think it's super important for everyone to not just feel like they have to attract from the top schools or anything like that as well. I know Kathleen Hogan, has our HR, she has even mentioned how we're doing more diverse outreach and just you're going to get the best everywhere. So making sure you're not missing anyone just because you're going for the top schools.
And there's a local company called Textio. This is super tactical, but something that Microsoft has experimented with. Textio will intake your job descriptions and sort of highlight the words or the phrasing that you're using that may dissuade some types of candidates from applying.
Yes, I've heard about this.
Yeah. So something to investigate or try out if you are recruiting for your company and haven't had much luck reaching out to a more diverse pool of candidates.
Right, because sometimes the job descriptions or things might, well, especially for women, we have to have every bullet, right, before we apply for something. And so little things like that can make somebody feel more welcome to a company.
That's exactly
painting
right.
the right picture.
Right. That's really great advice. So part of this journey to more diverse and inclusive workplaces is having people that love to work there and that have growth. And part of that is mentorships and feeling support, right? From your male advocates and your female advocates. And so I'm curious for both of you, getting on stage with Satya is a big deal, right? You probably had quite a bit of support, and you now going all to Azure engineering for a CVP. Let's talk a little bit about the mentors you've had in your life, how you fostered those relationships, and then what are you doing to pay it forward?
Yeah. So I was pretty lucky where Colleen was actually like my first mentor. I don't think she ever really knew, but I had surprise. I had zero idea what I was doing on my first day of work at Microsoft. She picks me up, like kind of. It was like first day of school, like putting on my backpack and helping me get to the office. Having, I think, a mentor who's kind of on the same level and where you can kind of ease your questions, not feel like I probably bothered you, and I apologize, but sometimes there's a level discrepancy. You might not go bother a GM or something, for instance, of like, where can I find out about benefits, right? I've been super lucky to work with a lot of very intelligent and well-connected women and men that throughout kind of this network that I built internally at Microsoft and externally, just staying in touch with. So I have like an official coach that was actually like a former GM that I worked with, and she's helping me figure out kind of how I want to try to work abroad with Microsoft, so she's helping me work through that. And then meeting even through different conferences. Scott Hanselman, I actually met through Next Tech Africa, which is a Microsoft conference we kicked off in Nairobi. And it was an introduction to an entirely different engineering side of Microsoft, and with a focus on the African continent. And I met a couple of CVPs there that were like, hey, I can provide mentoring lessons to you as well. So it's like totally like taking opportunities when they're available. And I think following up and just seeing your growth, I think personally, and then that will kind of come along with I think career will follow along. If you're growing personally, that's most important. Yeah. And your career will follow along.
Absolutely.
I think about mentorship on a couple of different parameters. So with I think the growing popularity of podcasts, there is so much good content out there. So whether I'm listening to How I Built This or
love that podcast,
Girl Boss Radio, I suddenly have access to people and their struggles, their journeys, their perseverance that I don't know, just didn't feel as accessible like a couple of years ago. And
good point.
I think about that a lot as like passive mentorship. Yeah. Like it's always in my ear on my commute. I have this great inspirational story to lean on. And then when it comes to more in-person mentorship, I get pretty tactical about it. So Sonia, to your point of finding a mentor who can help you work internationally, I try to approach people for a specific ask, which is also something that Donna Sarkar talked about in our interview. A lot of people approach her and ask, how can I be like you? And her response is, in what way do you want to be like me? Yeah. We need to get very focused in order for this to be a good exchange of information. I very much subscribe to building your own personal board of directors. And a lot of those mentors for me have been peer mentors. So
that's the better way of saying it. You're a peer mentor. That's a very nice, succinct way of what I rambled.
Yeah, I think as you build up your network at a new company or in a new industry, just learning about what your friends are doing, how they talk about their work, what type of opportunities they're going after. Your mentors don't necessarily have to be people with 10 or 20 years of experience. Technology is moving so quickly and our jobs are so different anyway that there's a lot to learn from people who are your age or younger. You know, the Women of Office, which is a resource group here at Microsoft, run out of the marketing organization, they do intergenerational mentoring. So they pair up a senior leader with a recent hire, typically a millennial or a Gen Y entering the workforce, to make sure that exchange of information is flowing both ways. And I think that's pretty radical and cool that they're doing that.
Yeah,
that's a really good tip.
Yeah.
I like that one. What you're talking about is the value of different viewpoints, and you can get that from your peers. You can get that from people older. In the work that you've done, and you're in engineering now, what do you think that value of having that different thought process is, and how it affects the business outcomes?
I think that the true magic, like your competitive advantage, happens at intersections of knowledge. So if you're a lawyer, that's a very valuable perspective that you can bring to a conversation. But if you're a lawyer who has a technology background and suddenly has a deeper perspective on privacy and how data flows in our system, that is a competitive advantage. So my interest in moving over to engineering was really the result of having this communications background and understanding that the move would provide this competitive advantage for me, would provide me with this experience to build my brand as not only a communicator, but a true technologist who is great at communicating. So I think competitive advantage comes at those intersections, and yeah, when you get outside of your comfort zone, that's where the magic happens.
Well, and when you put yourself in those scenarios, you are now learning from a whole different set of minds and backgrounds that ultimately is going to make more diverse thinking and innovative products and all that, right? If we all sat in our silos, we'd probably get nowhere.
Absolutely. I mean, having 6 years of experience in a marketing organization and then moving over to engineering, I have suddenly become this great ally of the marketing team to better communicate with that engineering organization. It's been very strategic along the lines of networking, along the lines of making more inclusive and well-communicated products. Yeah, it's been very strategic for me.
Yeah, you're building different, you had different marketing muscles as well because you had different products that you covered while you were in marketing. And I've only been in marketing, but different products, I think, in different types of roles, even just a short 4 years, has built me up to be a better marketer. But yeah, I'm missing the tech side. Like, it would be great to figure out how I can become, I love that, the intersection of knowledge, like very valuable, and goes a long way to be an advocate almost for your previous teams.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And even if you're at a small company, you can take that onus and do that and go on LinkedIn and connect with somebody, right? And that has a different background, or lean in on the mentorships to open up your minds. Because the more we can open up our minds to different perspectives, I think we're not going to have the pipeline issues, right? We'll start fixing for that. I love what you're saying. You want to go international too. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting in a global economy.
Well, first of all, I think there's value in always experiencing what it's like to work on the other side of the field. So always being in corp, we control a lot of the marketing messaging or the budgeting, and we take a lot of things, I think, for granted over sitting within corp. And I've gotten to work with the field a lot, and I think it's just a different muscle, just kind of like what I was talking about, a different marketing muscle that you could build. What it's like to work specifically to a new market as well is super valuable, and kind of that immersive experience would be. So part of me is like, why not go all in? And then I was like, Shanghai or Hong Kong or something. So baby steps right now, still thinking if it's feasible. But I think there's just value for your work as well as just personally what you can do to grow in a different region. And I bet your brother, Colleen, you mentioned your brother was in South Korea for 2.5 years now already. Like, it's just a different experience where you can learn probably vastly more, plus a new language.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are you super passionate about?
When I first started working at Microsoft, I didn't really know how much I loved technology. And working on different products over the years and understanding how to use those products and how they could change my life, I became really passionate about inclusion along a couple of different lines. So our podcast has been a great way for me to explore how we can make inclusion happen in the workplace. But, when I fly back to the East Coast, my family is not necessarily as tech savvy as my friends in this tech bubble here in Seattle. And I like to think about inclusion along that line as well, making sure that our products are really working for our customers. So whether that's showing my mom how to use a new feature or showing my brother how to get Cortana to tell him a joke, I'm super passionate about getting people to take full advantage of their technology that they're investing a lot of time and energy and effort into. That really came about when I was working on CRM, on customer relationship management marketing for different products. super tactically, I was using email to show people how to use different features, but it felt like a really empowering way for me to get people to make people's lives easier, whether that was like, here's how you can quickly schedule a calendar invite, to here's how you can get rid of a bunch of email newsletters quickly. It seems really silly, but that means that people have more time back in their lives to do things that matter to them. And working at a company at this scale, I just realized I am in a very unique position to give a lot of people empowerment through their technology.
That's great. Along similar lines, I think my passion area has been around evangelism, and some of those roles, like I mentioned, that I've thoroughly enjoyed, includes the one that I'm currently in, where evangelizing what the surface story is right now, from the commercial side, but the Satya keynote, for instance, and speaking to the partners through that lens, and getting a chance to amplify either our partner stories or what we're doing, the podcast even, has been some of my favorite moments of working here at the company, and getting a chance to kind of show people this isn't the same old company you might have known 10 years ago, and it's changed so drastically since Satya has come on board, and all for the better. So excited to kind of show people this renaissance period we're in, and even for our friends back on the East Coast, they're like, okay, I see Microsoft on the radar again. I'm like, okay. Meanwhile, I'm also let me introduce you to OneDrive, and teaching them how that works. So I do love kind of that storytelling component of evangelism, and getting people to learn, not to just. All right, it's a whole new, different Microsoft right now, and not just Microsoft, but evangelizing kind of the broader stories right now as well.
And I'll speak for both of us freely here.
Go
but
for it, girl.
I think, through dedicating a lot of our time to this podcast, I think a shared passion that we have is making sure that women have the platforms on which to tell their stories. Yeah. So when it comes to the venture capital space, women received only 2.9% of venture capital dollars in the last year. And I don't know, but I think that women had more than 2.9% of the great ideas last year.
Yeah, even Create and Cultivate, which actually all three of us got to attend, but I got to do some interviews, and I interviewed Whitney Casey and Brooklyn Decker, who are the founders of Finery, and they're one of those few women who got that funding, and they're about to go through a second round, and they're like, it's terrifying. I was like, but you have such a great idea, and it's just going through the pitch process of a fashion technology company to what tends to be male funders. It's a very different process. So it's telling that story and making sure people know hey, there are these great ideas. They deserve to be listened to and heard. The podcast has been great for that.
Yeah. And I think for those that are listening, when it's the facts, you have that awareness, but there's so many things that you can do, small things to help change those numbers, right? They're small, they're the small, right? There, and every single thing that we do every day can make a difference. And so I want to conclude and ask for those that are listening, if they could think about a few things they could do every day, or walk away and make their businesses, their teams more passionate, because you two are some very passionate employees of Microsoft. You don't just get passionate employees. So you have to create a culture that is passionate. But then how do you translate that into business? So what are some, walk away, some tips or things to think about?
A lot of my passion for this company, for our mission, comes from having amazing role models, and role models that are communicating really effectively. So, for example, Kathleen Hogan, we've mentioned a couple of times here, she's the head of human resources here at Microsoft, executive vice president of human resources. She, over the past year, has developed a really public presence on LinkedIn, telling the Microsoft story and telling her own story. And that has humanized her in such a way that I feel I feel more connected to her. I feel like I can relate more to this person in leadership than I ever have been able to. So my advice would be to identify the members of your leadership chain who have those great stories to tell and figure out the appropriate communication mechanisms to help them better connect with the broader organization.
And what's cool with that, it's a great piece of advice, is LinkedIn is the easiest platform to communicate with your employees, potential customers, your network, and you can quickly post an article, right? You can write a blog. You don't need to pay money for that. No. That is something every single person that's listening can do. So that's a great advice. Lead by example.
Mm-hmm. Lead by example.
Lead by example. Yeah. I thought what was cool, too, you mentioned a lot of different groups. Microsoft is a huge company. So everyone can start something or do something new, but things like you talked about with the Microsoft Office Women, the intergenerational, there are very small things you can create, mentorship programs like that, and tons of resources that companies could probably tap into.
Totally. I think that employee resource groups are pretty ubiquitous, whether you're working at a huge company or a small to medium business. If you're a person in leadership, reach out to those employee resource groups. Consider it a focus group. How can you be more inclusive for the members of your staff who maybe have a disability? How can you make the workplace feel a little bit comfortable for women or people of color? Asking those questions and really listening is a great way to lend your privilege as a person in power.
Yeah. Prime example, we host monthly a Women of Devices meeting. And so originally it started off of just the women on Surface Consumer, and then we invited the commercial team and then the business planning team, and then our CVP, Liz Hamron, joined us, and it's become this it's just an awesome environment, and the energy is great, and everyone's just kind of every 4 weeks we all get together and we have different topics we'll go through. So we just had ours yesterday, and we spoke about one woman had just come back from parental leave, and what that process was like and what the offerings are that you can take advantage of. Or another woman was talking about we had a lot of our TSPs or technical sellers in town, and only one of them or 4 of them were women, and how can we help get them a little bit more recognition and hopefully inspire more women to get into that business. So that was just literally an hour we all spend once a month together, just the women, and it's super impactful for us, and especially getting a chance to hear from our CVP. Her input was super valuable, and she's invested in it, which is great.
Yeah. Well, lots of great ideas here. Thank you for being so passionate about Microsoft. Great podcast. If you don't listen to it, follow it, subscribe. Microsoft Women, Business and Technology. Thank you for coming into the studio. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to Include. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what you think. And please join the conversation on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter at MS Partner.